they first in there, and out of 7 children, I was the most active. So I grew up at 5 people were in Muskogee. There, my mother never drove, but we always lived beside the church, and we walked everywhere there, and always walked back and forth to the church, cut to the park, and we were there. Small membership church, named after Alexia by Shelton, who early in life on her land, the Muskogee Creek citizen, discovered oil. And when she became wealthy, she paid to have that church built in that time. So quite a testament. And many of our tribal people, upon that discovered oil, would do the same for churches across Oklahoma. Indian Missionary Conference for that. So in 91, as I was looking for a photography studio and starting classes at Phillips Theological Seminary, was there, and Bishop Dan Sullivan called and asked me if I would go and help out at the Wesley Foundation. There are many of you who, at this church, I saw that had been connected with the Wesley Foundation. My very first appointment, churches in the district would provide food for us and meals, and had a wonderful experience there for that. And while I was there, the pastor at the BD Exodus, United Methodist Church, named after a former general superintendent, passed away, so I served that church for a couple of years. Having a wonderful time, but all your retired pastors and spouses would know this. Having a wonderful time was at Coops and Gills meeting. The late Reverend Thomas Trepay Sr. said, Bishop Sullivan wants you to move to Oklahoma City to do some work on the development for the conference. And I said, Tom, I'm having a great time here at Telephone. He said, I don't care, he's in review anyway. So there it was down the road. Spent the rest of my ministry there in Oklahoma City at the conference headquarters, raising awareness, just for the annual conference. It's been several times I've been here at Boston Avenue, promoting who we are, and have been thankful for this church for your support of the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. So then later when I was there, filling the position, working in the conference office, and we had a new church in Norman, started by lay people. The first pastor only made it like four months, and the superintendent, who I'll talk about tomorrow, my sermon said, hey, can you go and fill in until we find somebody? The trick is, and all you superintendents know this, some retirees, they never left for anybody. I was there for about 10 years. That's certainly like the church, and they're working in the conference office and everything, built the church while we were there physically, and it's one of our stronger churches today, and OIMC is thankful for that, getting that together. And so I wanted to share some of my background in terms of what I get to share tonight as I think to my experience serving in OIMC, visiting all these churches and tribes, growing up in Muskogee, only knowing about Choctaws, Cherokees, and Creeks for the most part, and then traveling over the city, giving them a chance to meet so many folk with that. So that's what I'm going to be looking at tonight for that. One of the most popular questions I get when I get to talk about Native folk is, what do you call yourselves? I mean, what is the terminology? Is this a lot? The preferred piece, of course, if you call a person by their tribe, of course, you have to be in a relationship with those folks to know. DJ, many of us would see her dress, she would say, she's a Choctaw. We know those designs. That would happen to be. So that's our preferred thing. For the older folks, those in the 80s and 90s, in our churches and on my folks, you were going to say Indian. And I'd go to Kiowa Church for many years to do the sacraments. They had no pastor, and the elders would say, let's sing Indian, which meant let's sing Native songs. That's just what they're accustomed to. And the rest is not what we hear much these days. Another one is American Indian. All that comes out of the 60s and 70s. I think about the New York Indian movements. Other places you think about places and the rest, what they're named after. You still see that a lot. And United Methodist Church, Native American is the term that we use for most, and that seems to be one that many use today in our sphere. For younger folk, Native, and when I preach or teach, I go back to all of these back and forth. And Natives another. Indigenous for younger folk who strive to understand who they are. Love to use the term indigenous, and you'll hear that often. I noticed Sam Cooks and Gills has changed their name to Indigenous. That is interesting, but all. First American, my church at Norman was First American United Methodist Church. People kept trying to call it First United Methodist. No, it's First American United Methodist. I do not know who they are as First Americans. And in Canada, many who will use First Nations. And so all these terms go back and forth. So all those are used for the most part, except for Indian, we don't use as much anymore. Although I do find all the scholars, historians, would use that term, which is interesting for that. Oklahoma is all kinds of union and jumps to the tribe. But our recognition is that for the tribes of Oklahoma, our 39 tribes are all recognized by the federal government. Yeah, that means to be a tribe, you have to have a language, you have to have a history, and your culture. And you think about the 39 tribes in the state today, only 2 are indigenous to what is now Oklahoma. The Caddo tribe, Wichita tribe, are the rest of us came all over the country to be here in Oklahoma. And then for other states around the country, there are state-recognized tribes. So somehow they can't fit this criteria, but the state will recognize. Oklahoma does not have any state-recognized tribes. Where I come from, the Great Plains, and my conference area is all of Kansas, Nebraska, about 700 churches. All of ours are federal recognized. We have 4 reservations in each state. So you think about the diversity of who we are as indigenous people. We're so different, so unique, and it's always fun to get to learn about cultures and culture as I get to travel. These, I think, are from the Great Plains. And so let's talk about the Oklahoma tribes, the 39 you see here, the places where we come from. Biggest ones, of course, Cherokees, Choctaws, there in terms of enrollment, but others have lots of land. So you'll see that where we happen to come from. Tulsa is unique. In fact, if you have 3 tribal jurisdictions in the city of Tulsa, the Cherokee Nation, the Stogie Creek Nation, and the Osage Nation. Where I have been past many years up on the city, we had no tribal boundaries. If it was part of the land run where we happen to be at. So Tulsa is much more unique. It has to do with all sorts of things for that, which makes it interesting for that. And then, of course, let's talk about the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. For folk who know their history, which I'll talk about in a minute, the Indian Methodist Conference is the original Methodist in the state. Throughout my life, I've reminded my colleagues of Oklahoma often of that. Oklahoma may have more numbers than the rest. It was Indian Methodists who were the very first to be here as the Methodist Church. For that, which one thing we're very, very proud of. Historians would tell us that early on when we look at the history of how we got to be here, we look at the early evangelists when they came. Early Methodists, when they began to look at evangelism among the indigenous people. So it first began in the Tennessee Conference. Cherokees were there in North Carolina, Georgia for the Muskogee Creeks, and Mississippi. Now, I got to think about this history that the Southeastern tribes is so different from others around the country. We have been there since time immemorial. First settlers and immigrants came among my people who were not like tribes in the north, who were not folks who followed the buffalo for their existence. They were farmers, agriculture. I've been there for some time, so the first settlers came in, and so the native folk would introduce them to how to do this or that. And so folks continued to come, largely intermarriage, a lot of ways where they happened to be at. And many of us know, we'll see the terminology that we don't use often in the state, and this native folk don't. The 5 civilized tribes, Cherokee, Choctaws, Creeks, Seminoles, and Chickasaw. We were called it because in the area where our ancestors lived, that the native folk were 2 things. One was for survival, and the other was to try to fit in to what's happening, knowing, well, not knowing what the future would hold. And so everything that most of the indigenous folk did among the 5 tribes was, the market was modeled after the European settlers from Mexico. And so because of that, we were called the 5 civilized tribes, which meant that the rest of the tribes were not, which is not true. So you can imagine that brings some consternation for Kairos and others who might have to be there after that. But it also goes back to that the tribes modeled their lives after the early settlers so much that some of our wealthiest Choctaws, Cherokees, Creeks, and Muskogee Creeks owned black slaves. That was what God is trying to civilize that we own black slaves. So today, if you pay attention to the news, especially among the Cherokees on Discovery Creek, some of those, and then there's a lot of conversations about the freedmen, folk who would have been at the time, were not related by blood, but who were granted membership because of being a part of the family as a slave. In many places, there's still a lot of conversation about that. So Tennessee began with their work, and of course, followed by Muskogee Creeks. In this area, all kinds of history in terms of the Methodist Church and Muskogee Creek people there. And then, even 1822, Chief John Ross, who invited the Methodists to come evangelize among his people. In 1827, the Mississippi Conference began work among the Choctaws. That's when the older places, they're still in existence today there in Mississippi. You'll see a lot of these names if you travel across the state, Shakota, LaFleur County, all these places, all go back to the Indian Methodist roots. So life is going on well for people and subsistence, and things were doing well, and more people kept coming to this country, and folks saw the beautiful land, fertile land in the southeast, and wanted that land. But what really did us in was when they discovered gold in Georgia. Then there was no turning back after that. So the government tried to figure out, how do we get our hands on this land and these resources, but also what do we do with this quote-unquote Indian problem? What do we do with these folk who are on this land that's valuable and we want it? And so think about the 5 tribes that are governments. Many of these leaders have relationship with the presidents, and they went back and forth to Washington to have counsel with the presidents and others, and they had some good relations. Early on, the French and English would get tribes to be on the side in the wars, all sorts of things. So they both knew each other during that time. But President Monroe was the first to start this idea that we need to move all the native tribes to the other side of the state. Western Missouri and Arkansas were there. And there were some tribes, some Cherokees and Choctaws had left already. They knew, they saw the writing on the wall that early, and the rest waited for what was going to happen there. From 1829 to 1839 began the forced marches of what I call the trails, or trails up here. Cherokee have known well for them, but all the tribes, the 37 tribes that are here today, all had their own trails of tears into what is now Indian Territory. One of the photos, the river began the first white frost of October. The late Reverend Homanole wrote a book titled that, chronicling what's going on. An idea from the late Jerome Tiger from Muskogee of what it would have been like in Muskogee Creeks, walking in the snow, and when people were dying, often all that they got to do was throw a blanket over them and move on, if they even had a blanket to do. And the Cherokees themselves, the Cherokees are most well known when the treaties were done or the removal happened. If they had a wagon, they could take one wagon with them to Indian Territory. Horses and the rest. So you see this picture by Dorothy Sullivan depicting what that might have looked like. And the Eastern Cherokees today in North Carolina, the Eastern Band of Cherokees, those that would manage to stay behind. If you've ever been to the beautiful Smoky Mountains, you can see how folks can hide out. It's a beautiful area there. So this group that saw there were people suffering, we managed to stay behind. The same was true for the Choctaws. What the government said for those that stay behind, you can stay, but you're no longer Choctaw. You're no longer Cherokee. You're just like us. Later, they reclaimed their status of the Mississippi Bandas. Choctaws and Eastern Bandas Cherokees. So this is always a fascinating for when they arrived in Indian Territory. The Methodist Church was on both sides. There are many Methodist pastors and lay people who advocated for removal. And there are many who said this is a crime, in fact, to these indigenous people. And the government would be mad at those who sided with the native folk and gave them a choice. And they could send them to jail, or they could go to Indian Territory with the tribes. And many went with our tribal people. Many came in some of these towns and places in southeast Oklahoma, northeast Oklahoma, named for these white pastors, missionaries, others who traveled with the tribes to this land. Alexander Kelly was one who worked at the Catechism of East, and Thomas Myers with the book in Southeast Oklahoma among my peoples. One of our churches, which has the name Myers in there as well. So both we have great admiration for this book. So when they got here, they helped them to be able to get set up. There are many native preachers with this group. Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterians. Remember, the church had done their work already with creating these churches. So back at home in the southeastern part of this country, there are folk who had Methodist churches, and the rest, there were deacons, there were local pastors, lots of native folk who were already part of the system. So when I got to Indian Territory, it wasn't real hard to get started once again. At the time, the Arkansas Conference was the conference that worked on this. Of course, Smith was the preaching post. That's where pastors would go and get sent out throughout Indian Territory, not just natives, but other folk as well. So when the folk got here, it had an easier start because of this large number of Native American people who already were Christian in that place. After that, 1,000 Cherokee Methodists, including Chief John Ross, 3,000 Choctaw, and Chickasaws, and a smaller number of Muskogee Creek and Seminole. The work had suffered, but much had to be done over, but they were able to do that. In southeast Oklahoma, Idaville, far southeast Oklahoma, and the Arkansas border, are churches today that when the tribes first landed, the Choctaws and Cherokees first landed to where they were going to stay, one of the very first things they did was to rebuild their churches, to start them over again. So if you travel far southeast Oklahoma, near Idaville, near Bethel Baptiste, there you'll find churches that have been around on the same land since day here. So there's a handful of you who will have known Bishop Andy W. Smith. I was visiting this church a while back, and he signed a proclamation there dedicating to Bethel Hill as being the oldest Methodist church in what is now Oklahoma for that. So folk who recognize that history for that. You know, we think about indigenous people. Early on, almost all of our history was oral, not written down. Stories were passed down from generation to generation. Some of you remember my predecessor, the late Reverend Thomas Rope Sr., Miss Jesse's relative. He was one of those. But if he worked in the office, Dr. Bates, if I asked him a question, I had to have at least 30 minutes to get the response. So if it's a quick question, I didn't ask him. Because he had to include so much of his descriptions. And I was so thankful when he passed that I listened to those stories. And many got to record right down. But that's how early on. So early on, our stories come down from oral tradition. And on the Trail of Tears, it would have been from diaries or the documents. And so one of the documents come from when the soldiers was with the Choctaw people. I never saw any people conduct themselves better, more devout. They had morning and evening prayers. I spent as much time on board of the reading and singing hymns. A part of this company belongs to the Methodist Church. No man who was present, could form any idea of the difficulties that we have encountered owing to the cholera, influence occasioned by dreadful effects. Death was hourly among us. Fortunately, there are people that will walk to the last, or I do not know how they would go on. When they came from that way, they spent most of the time on foot, horseback. When you got to the Mississippi, caught the boat, oftentimes the boats were off the boat. Some disappeared, many died. About a third of the people from tribes died before they arrived to Indian Territory. And so the neat part is once, folks were getting settled in 1844, many non-Methodist scholars would know then what was happening at that General Conference to fight over slavery. But there are Methodists at the General Conference who noticed what was happening in Indian Territory, that the Indian Methodists were gathering and meeting and worshiping. And so they took note and formed what is now the Oklahoma Indian Mission Conference. At the time, it was the Indian Mission, organized in 1844, at Fort Hill, Oklahoma, and outside of Fort Gibson, there in this particular place. the stats that tell us 12 white preachers, members of the Arkansas Conference, 3 Indian preachers, members of the San 21 local Indian pastor, among the established Dakota, which we'll talk about in 1,500 Cherokees, 1,000 Choctaws, 600 Creeks, 150 Negro members, which would have been the black slaves that would have came in their family. I got white members, about 3,350. So they began to gather, and even in the archives of Oklahoma City University is the original minutes of the very first annual conference, written in beautiful longhand there, that is there in that place, thinking about going back to 1844. Yeah. Rodney's Chapel, the sign is it's somewhere out there, lying from on Telephone, that the state of Oklahoma erected about decided when this very first Indian Methodist conference was held. There, you see how far the boundaries to Indian territories. Indian territory shot straight up. It wasn't just Oklahoma, but the work we did in Oklahoma was Oklahoma, later Kansas and Texas. So, because of its success, the General Conference authorized the annual conference. You see the boundaries, which are huge boundaries, again, which never went up that way, although Indian territory does. I always liked it because people forget how advanced many of our people were at that time. Many think we became pastors and other pieces. Once this was done, that was not the case. Walter Collins ordained as a deacon at that conference, and H.O. Benson. There's a long-time Choctaw folk in this conference, still have relatives here today there that were. John Page, who was the full-blood, but also spoke English, interpreted there. And near Pensacola, Oklahoma, is a marker that's a commission remembering his work that he did at that particular time for that. So this is the piece, again, we're very, very proud of because of our work. Southern Shakota, recognize Shakota for the town of Shakota, Oklahoma. When I head Oklahoma City to my mother's house in Muskogee, I passed through Shakota often. But Southern Shakota, as a young boy, I remember the missionaries who evangelized among the Muskogee Creeks. And ironically, the Muskogee Creeks were the first people that John Wesley met. John Wesley had a lot of issues with his personal life and other stuff at the time, and didn't make it very far. But this have been the first people he would have encountered. Didn't do much, but later folk came back. Southern Shakota was, historians say, about 10 or 11 years old, and he saw missionaries baptizing relatives of his at the creek where they lived. He wanted to go to be baptized, but they ran him off because he was too young after that. And so he had an interest in Christianity early on there. But yes, when he arrived, as he grew, he became a faithful member of the Methodist Church there as a youngster. And because the government had been so hard on the Muskogee Creek people, their leaders would walk to Indian territory in shackles. They're very cruel because it's skirmishes and others they have with them. So when they got to Indian territory, one of the very first things the governments did, you might remember all these tribes still had governments. One of the very first things they did was to make it a penal offense to become a Christian. And many of our tribes still had ceremonial religions, they still do today. And so if you were caught preaching or doing Bible study or a local Indian church, your penalty would be lashes. Not by the light police force, but by your own, the Muskogee Creek law enforcement. So this could be your relatives going to come and administer the lashes if you were caught there. And at the age of 20, he suffered 39 lashes there. Caught him, I think, doing praying or being with this group of Muskogee Creek people. And so they began to administer the lashes. And they said, will you give up your Christ now? And he has this famous passage here. You may kill me, but you cannot separate me from my Lord Jesus Christ. Powerful witness that there's other Christians who made such sacrifices for the gospel and for the work that they did. Later, he had much to do to arrange that law to make that a penal offense. He became a principal chief of the Muskogee Creek Nation. They're elected to the Ecumenical Methodist Conference. 1883, never made it because of his health. Became an ordained Methodist elder in the church. He was also district superintendent, not just for the native folk, but for these new predominantly white churches that were springing up. My hometown in Muskogee, Oklahoma, when the railroad came, as in many places, they would build 2 churches on the side of the railroad tracks. Many of you are familiar with St. Paul United Methodist Church in Muskogee, beautiful place. And about 20 years ago, they had this in their sesquicentennial, or no, centennial, 100 years. And their lawyer, they recognized that he was the one who led the way to have the church built. So again, think about this native folk who had a hand in building some of these beautiful big churches across northeast Oklahoma there. He, in 1844, would also petition to the General Conference of Translated Scriptures and to the Muskogee Creek language, which they did, and became the very first Native American district superintendent for the whole denomination there for that. So one that we're quite proud of for his work for that. His family are still a part of the Newtown United Methodist Church, and if you travel to Oklahoma, with a creek, Muskogee Creek headquarters to the west is that church, and he's buried there, still has ancestors there worshiping in that church. Yeah, their church is a historic church there as well. So we look at what happened as the churches among Muskogee Creeks and Choctaws and Seminoles, Chickasaws and Cherokees began to spring up. There was still work to be doing in the western part of the state. And remember, the western tribes is so much different from the eastern tribes. Persons who really did follow the bison and the buffalo for their existence. That's why eventually made them change their ways when the government destroyed most all the buffalo herds around the country. Moved to reservations, and J.J. Reppin was an early missionary, and he was at his annual conference. I love this story. There at his annual conference, and told the bishop, he said, somebody needs to go evangelize. This is a quote, so Congress senators don't get mad at him. He said, someone needs to go evangelizing these wild tribes in the West. That's what he said. And so Dr. Dixon, the bishop, so then I think, since you brought up the question, I want to send you out to do that. So be careful when you young pastors, and be careful what you ask for after that. So he went by himself, left his family at home. And one of the things that made J.J. Reppin so successful, after 20 years ago, I could find elders who spoke native folk who spoke so highly of him, is that he would start an institute, but he really tried to understand the ways of the tribes. Now, it's not just one. There would have been 8 or 9 tribes, which were so different. But he really tried to find ways to understand who they were. And the boarding school piece is another presentation itself, so we got roads. But so he opened this boarding school, but the good part was when the kids came, their relatives all lived nearby. And so they weren't like in Carlisle, miles and miles away. They lived nearby. And he himself allowed that and really tried to understand the culture of the people there. So he would evangelize among the Comanches and their pastures, pointing to serve in 1890. A lot of our pastors have come out of him, Kickingbird, Black Creek, taught hunting horse. All of these are relatives who are serving as pastor in the OMC today, except for maybe Kickingbird. Sure, there's some of his relatives there after that. So this long legacy of people he worked with and created. His photo here, his family, when I'd get in office, when I was in OMC, with great grandkids would come by from time to time, bring us documents, pieces that we would put in archives. So they still have a good relationship. And our church in Anadarko, which is named after him, after that. But again, our elders, for the most part, have very good things to say about him, about his work. That's not true of all missionaries, but he really worked hard to be able to be that. So we think about what's happening before staying here. There, in 1906, I believe, the 6 or 7. Did 6. I'm going to go with 6. I'm wrong. I would do that. So again, to this point, it's an Indian Mission Conference. You got native churches, non-native churches around the state being served by native people and the rest. There, and Oklahoma is springing up. And so one of the very first things those churches do was to create their own Methodist conference. I think it was 2 actually, East and West later, without any consultation with what was happening in Indian Methodist Conference. They just got up and did it and started creating their own work and new work. Also, about half of the membership, so think about this, at that time, how many native folk would have only spoke the language? So if you go into a non-native church, you speak in English, would have been no. And so that was very difficult for the folk. I remember maybe 15, 20 years ago, Oklahoma was celebrating, maybe it was a centennial. Maybe that was it. And one of the first organizers came to me and said, can you come and talk to us? And we're going to talk about this at the annual conference. And I said, you mean we talk about how, I told her the story. She said, never mind. I'm not sure what Oklahoma did, but don't forget that it wasn't a hunky-dory story for so many people. But although it lost half of its membership, many of the people still went along. So there's a period between 1906 and 18 that Indian Methodist work was left hanging. Oklahoma started, and so I think his last name is first and his last name is Burr, and he had a strong passion for the work we're doing, so he kept us together for that period of time to 1918. And a group of advocates said this work has to continue about the Indian Methodist Conference, so they began doing work at that time. I think that delegates took notice 1918, again reestablished the work of the Indian mission. Later, the work was expanded in Texas, which we have a very vibrant church in Dallas, Texas, one in Wichita and Lawrence. Although they're in my boundaries, they belong to the Indian Mission Conference. For that. So I was in Atlanta last week and presenting at the Peachtree Road United Methodist Church. Beautiful church there. And part of the issue goes back to looking at the Indian Mission Conference. And in the 70s was a very defining time for Native people. Think about the American Indian movements, takeover of Alcatraz, all these things going on. And the same is true for Indian Methodist churches. All this time, well, up until Stephen had control of what's going on. Now, later, with the Oklahoma East and West, anything the Indian Mission Conference wanted to do, they had to get permission from Oklahoma. Sign your own deeds, property, all that kind of stuff. And they said, enough is enough. 1968, we became the United Methodist Church. 1970, we gathered to talk about what that looked like in St. Louis. So they said, you can bring 2 delegates of Indian Mission. You can have voice, but you don't have a vote. And that wasn't good enough for our folks, fortunately. And so they began talking about it at the annual conference. Minnie Doherty, who ironically, although she knew so much about indigenous people, she was Hispanic. Our very first lay person to the conference was Hispanic. Knew her well. Gosh, she's a treasure. All the ONC folk who here knew of her. And the late Reverend Thomas Ruppes, Sr. So 71 began this resolution to become a provisional conference. Some of you folk would know now his Bishop Woody White. He was the General Secretary at the time for Religion and Race, and he worked with the conference to become the missionary conference. Now, some of that, think about the 70s, paternalism, very heavy from Oklahoma. And one of the general superintendents at the time, when they were talking about this, told a group of folk in Oklahoma, Indian Mission said, you Indians are getting too big for your britches. Put there. Don't you know those are fighting words when they heard that? And although the general superintendent at the time really acted as a scared of the bishop, we didn't see the bishops all the time. I don't think it was till Bishop Smith came that the bishops were stationed here. They would, once a year, a bishop would come, preside over the conference, and then it would be done. And so they continued this work, and thankful with Bishop Woody White and many longtime friends in Oklahoma, some are still around, who advocated for Indian Mission to become the Oklahoma Indian Mission Conference. I have them in 72, along with Redbird, who has a different name now. Redbird's a missionary conference among Appalachia and in Alaska, which has a different name. Those are 3 missionary conferences. I see Randy McCurdy out there served in Alaska when it was a missionary conference, I think, for that. So here's the piece, you think about so many of us advance to general prophet. I can tell you, I had to share this with you, Sam. Bishop Dr. Beach and I were several general conferences together. After Thomas Ruppes passed, I stepped into his stead, and the one thing I learned, and Gail knows this, is I did not sit by him at a meeting after that, so I could pay attention after that. I had to provide commentary on everything. Sometimes I went long, sometimes I was trying to pay attention after that. I've spent many times on there. So at the very end, there is a committee for everything at that conference. And so there's a committee on the agenda. They get to determine if you're on or if you're off. And so there were colleagues in the Oklahoma conference at the time, they're all gone now, I think, who really fought against Indian Mission becoming Indian Missionary Conference. Some of these names that have named some churches throughout Oklahoma there. And the conference is about over. And all of us have been there. We know what it's like when it's almost done. You're ready to hit the road. You're tired. And this had not come out because whoever's presiding was stopping this to happen. So finally, some folks talked them into it and got that moving. And the very last action of that 72 General Conference was for the Indian Mission to become the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. So I made a mention last week. The church I was at, Peachtree Road, that's where the delegation stayed at for 3 or 4 days. 28 people, only had 2 delegates, but that many came that were interested. They're almost all gone now. But $3,000, 28 paid folks traveled to Oklahoma to Peachtree Road. So you can only imagine what it's like for me to be there presenting, thinking about this place where folks I knew would have hung out, what they were dreaming and thinking about at that time. And they're excited for what would have happened at that annual conference for that. Many can remember, and everything used to be, we're trying to save money at the United Methodist Church there. So we used to get the hymn books that had a logo on the front. I don't think we got any last time. And we'd get them and pass around, signing all that stuff. And Tom Murphy, so when he passed, his family gave this to me, the signature hymnal that had the words. Now that's a Civic Center, side of the 72 General Conference. The Indian Mission Conference was granted the status of a missionary conference on Friday night, the last session of the General Conference. So I had it moved, and of course the rest is history. When the very first things they did was to begin taking over the deeds, signing them, transferring those deeds back over to the Indian Methodist Conference, now able to own its own property, manage its own financial affairs, shape its own destiny. Bishop Solomon, when he came, 92, I think my first bishop is actually served under, I named Bishop Hart, but under Bishop Solomon. That was his famous words. He said, "It's time for your people to claim your own destiny." He would tell that for 8 years he's with us. And we worked hard in spirit of that. Every bishop since has done the same for that work. There, and of course, the Oklahoma Indian Missionary Conference. Today, with 81 churches around the state of Oklahoma, there are many who are leading the way around tribal language revitalization. That's another topic for another day in terms of where that happens to be at in our lives for that. Our David that we had this great artwork that Brent and State's Agreement designed, looking ahead on talking about the legacy of our past, the hope for our future, writing on the work that so many faithful people did, which I'll preach about tomorrow morning, over the many, many years, and so many people who are continuing that important work. I think that's it. I think we have some time for responses and questions, Sam. Can we do that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Questions, comments, Will?
This is right here's
Yes, question here. Rigor of our mission is simple. Thank you. I can't remember now. I've been there many times. Central Appalachian did some great work there. Thank you. Other comments, questions? I'm going to make it easier for me.
You're first. But I don't know if you might address this in one of your layers. If you want to say, well, you can put it off the list. But as we think about, in the United Methodist Church, when we became the United Methodist Church in '68, and we dissolved the Central Conference, which had been a racially divisive conference really for African Americans, and we said no, we're all going to one. As we've talked about, what would it be like for the Oklahoma YMC conferences to kind of merge together, do that, and yet there is the need in essence for YMC to be able to chart their own destiny, as Bishop Solomon talked about, is for Indigenous leadership to really have its own place. Could you just speak to a little bit about why that is important?
Sure can. Sam talked about the Central Conferences, Central Jurisdiction Conference, which is all African American folks for so long, from 39 to 68. There, and the church was a way to address, just address all sorts of things. I'll leave it at that. Which, of course, was the vastly very racist thing for the church to do. But what some of my colleagues were saying on the council of the place, they said what good it did was that all African American folk got to be together. So everything they held in common was the culture and the rest. What it did was to continue the racism and not being afraid of the church. And people ask it often at Oklahoma Indian Mission Conference, why has been so helpful, is that everything they do is from a Native perspective. Up until Tom Workplace's selection as superintendent in the early 90s by Bishop Solomon, up until that point, your leaders were all white. And often you do what they tell you to do. And so finally, you got a chance to do your own thing, you know who you are. And Tom Workplace would say, who better to tell you about an Indian than an Indian? That was his generation having talk. There, and so that's been the piece that's been it. What's made Indian Mission Conference so successful is that probably 99% of clergy are Native. All the work they do is Native there. So that's been a big plus for what they've done for that. And outside of Oklahoma Indian Mission, especially after disaffiliation, there's about 9 churches, I think, in Michigan. Some are older than ONC, Indian Methodist churches. And the Long Beach used to have a good number. But many of there's that in disaffiliation. They have about 4 or 5. So ONC by far has the most indigenous churches of any in this country and provide a lot of leadership for the denomination and the rest. And so I appreciate the question. Thank you. DJ?
In what year, Bishop Arthur, what year did the Choctaw or the Indian churches start preaching the English?
DJ asked what years did Choctaw started speaking in English. I would say, I share people that Choctaw, the Choctaw Nation, who really
Churches, the sermons.
Yeah, have really bought into Christianity. I mean, everything there. And so I would think that'd be pretty early, probably upon removal, folk already preaching in English, I bet.
Well, when I grew up, it was all in Choctaw.
Yeah.
Choctaw preachers and Bibles were in Choctaw.
Yeah, she's that same when she grew up, everything was in Choctaw. For many of our churches, that's the case. I think today among 81, excuse me, probably 45 pastors, lay pastors in ONC. There may be 7 or 8 that speak the language and that will preach off and on in the language today to that. Yeah, you should. Any other questions or comments before we finish up? Yes.
Within Anglo-American churches, others.
What?
Is there a mix of people in the churches?
Oh, yeah. She's asked if there's a mix of people in our churches. There's a lot of intermarriage today among our people as well. And so you go to a native church and you'll see all kinds of folk represented in the church. And many people come, I think, to ONC churches that are not native because which I'll talk about tomorrow night in Monday, because they appreciate the hospitality and the relationship. The hospitality and relationship among our people, and that draws them in. And of course, the language and wanting to learn about people. Such as ours.
It's big from different tribes.
Yes. Yeah, we have many that are among the Muskogee Creek Nation and pretty solid of that tribe. But the urban areas, you'll get a big mix of people. There are 3 churches up in the city when they started. Choctaw started first, and then one native church was there, mostly Choctaws. There are other tribes there as well, and they kept that along. So they started a second church. One became predominantly Choctaw, the other became very intertribal. And then the third one became Muskogee Creek Seminole. So if you go to many of our urban churches, Dallas, Tulsa Indian, Myrtle Park, others, so there's a point we would say that 6 tribal hymns, you could have as many as 9 tribal hymns being sung for that. Yes, we're kind of different, yeah. So it is a beautiful thing just to hear all the languages where they're at, especially when folks can translate what those songs mean. Many of the songs which I'll talk about tomorrow for the 5 tribes, and many of those hymns which are written on the Trail of Tears, when folks were facing all sorts of calamities there. And don't want to give away my sermon yet for that. Put on to that. Yeah.
That's
Well, folks, I appreciate the time tonight. Tomorrow morning, we're going to be talking about looking at the past, but also a future, the faithfulness of so many people. And then tomorrow night and Monday night, we'll talk about the three values I find among all Indigenous people who have been understanding community, relationship, and hospitality. And also talk about how that relates to the work we do here at Boston Avenue and whatever church we come from. Three things that we need to be working on in our own churches. But thank you for your hospitality to be here. It's been done. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Bishop. We appreciate that, and we appreciate Tulsa Indian United Methodist Church. What a wonderful meal that was this evening. I hope you can come back tomorrow. The sanctuary services, Bishop Wilson will be preaching at 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock. It's the same service, similar in both services, so you come with one or the other, and we'd love for you to do that. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll be here at Jubilee tomorrow evening. And tomorrow night, the Cooks and Hills Indigenous Center is going to be providing a buffet of native foods. And so we look forward to trying out a lot of different kinds of things. And they did say that for those who are less adventurous, they'll have chicken salad. So in any event, we hope you'll come back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. And then Monday night, we'll be in the sanctuary at 7 o'clock for the wrap up and the finale, and we appreciate that. So thank you all for coming, and have a lovely evening.